Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Clocked In with the Press, hosted at Altman Studios in beautiful downtown Brentwood, California. In this podcast, we highlight news stories, individuals, and organizations that deserve your attention. This is your host, Melissa van Ruiten, clocking in. Today, we're welcoming back Brentwood City Manager Tim Ogden. But first, let's hear a word from this episode's sponsor.
Today's episode is sponsored by our friends at Sip & Scoop in downtown Brentwood. Sip & Scoop delivers smiles for miles, sip by sip, and scoop by scoop. Gelato, Italian ice, and signature coffee beverages are just a few of the delicious treats on their menu. Stop by Sip & Scoop at 234 Oak Street in downtown Brentwood to get your fix. They're also on DoorDash.
Thank you so much to this episode's sponsor. Welcome back, Tim. We are so excited to have you back to kind of give us an overarching glimpse of what is currently going on with the city and what we have to look forward to. However, before we jump into all of that, go ahead and give us a brief introduction for the listeners who didn't catch your first episode.
Great. Well, Melissa, again, thank you for the invitation to come back. Hopefully the first one went well enough that I've been invited back. And if you missed it, click below. I'm sure you can find a link to it. I'm Tim Ogden, the city manager with Brentwood, and I've worked here about 2.5 years. I live here with my family and my kids, and we love living here in this community and love serving the community.
Wonderful. We're happy to have you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And so again, for listeners who may have missed your first episode, what does a city manager do? Can you give us maybe a brief overview, and then also, and I wouldn't say more importantly, but what's the difference between a city manager and a city mayor?
Sure. Let me start with your last question first. Sure. The mayor is elected by his constituents, his or her constituents, and elected to a 4-year term. And the mayor, in consultation with the city council, actually hire the city manager. So I work directly for those 5. And they come up with the high-level policies, and we help them figure out the best way to implement it through operations. So I'm like the CEO of the company and manage and oversee all the operations with a lot of help, some 350 plus employees who are experts in their fields and do a fantastic job. And maybe one quick analogy that I've shared with some folks just so they can see how much the city touches their daily lives. We're a partner all the way through. If you think about waking up early in the morning and you got to go use the restroom, our water division takes care of that, and the wastewater division takes care of that. And then get into your car, take your kids to school, and pass by a beautiful park that's well maintained. The city parks division handles that. The city planning worked with the school district on planning their school site. Drive over a newly paved road that the streets division took care of. You might pass by a patrol car heading to a service call, keeping our community safe. Head to your office job and enjoy working there that was attracted to the community by our economic development staff. And then the buildings itself was approved through engineering and planning, and then the planning commission, city councils. And then you take lunch break downtown and run into an old friend who just happened to get hired by the city of Brentwood as an accountant, so works in the finance department that was recruited by HR. As you finish your day heading home, you realize tomorrow's garbage day and you need to get your toters out, and our solid waste division picks those up and takes care of them. And you happen to live next door to the city manager, who is getting home after picking up his kids from the aquatics lessons that our parks department puts on, and get to chat about the budget that's coming up, and our finance department takes care of that. And you go to bed thinking, wow, I had no idea how much the city is touching my daily life, and so grateful to live here in Brentwood. And so in a sense, I oversee all of that with a lot of help.
Whew, it makes me tired just thinking about it.
I sleep well.
I bet. And it's good. You should be able to sleep well.
Sure.
Things they run very smoothly.
It's a beautiful community. It really is. I've lived in a couple other communities. I've worked in a couple other communities, and Brentwood really does things well.
I like it. We've been here over 7 years now. But it's hard. I mean, 2.5 years. It's crazy to think about. It was 2.5 years ago that we met. I was taking your photos for 110 magazine.
Yes.
And had a wonderful conversation, and I can't believe that 2.5 years have gone by in that time.
And now it'll be 110 pretty soon, right?
I know, right? Oh, this
nice
weekend.
And hot outside.
Woo. So, and then just touching on, you know, talking about in your analogy, meeting up with a friend that got hired, I know that the city has a lot of job listings currently on the website. So if you are local and would also love to come work for our wonderful city, check out the City of Brentwood website under careers. I believe it's listed under. And there's a whole span of them. And they pay well.
Something for everybody.
Benefits, good pay.
Yes.
Let's start out today's conversation we're going to dig deep right off the bat, and then we'll lighten it up for the end.
Sure.
So it won't be hardball the whole
time. Throw it at me. Let's go.
So something that's been a little bit of a hot topic, and not just for Brentwood, I'm sure a lot of cities, this is a hot topic, but we have the updated housing element for the next Regional Housing Needs Allocation Cycle, otherwise known as RHNA. It's in the process of being adopted. The cycles last, I believe it's 6 years. Is that
8 years?
8 years. That's right. And so right now we're finishing out cycle 5, and we have cycle 6 coming up. Can you tell our listeners a little bit what a housing element is, what it entails, and why it's required?
Sure.
Awesome.
Let me back up a little bit, and that is that every city is required to have a general plan.
Yes.
And the general plan lays out land uses citywide, what's allowed in certain areas, commercial, residential, industrial, office, parks. And the housing element is a chapter, an element of the general plan, so hence the name housing element. And the housing element describes what kind of housing stock and inventory you have in your city. It details what you currently have, what you'd like to have more of. It looks at all the programs that you offer to try to incentivize housing to occur, especially for lower income qualifying levels. And the state does an annual process, the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, that says, in our case, we were to do some 750-ish units during the prior cycle, and did some. And then this cycle, they've doubled it. So some 1,500 units. And when I say units, that's a single apartment unit, or it could be a house, but it's units. And they then have us assign various income levels to those different units and make sure that it's meeting certain targets. And then another 30 plus pages of different goals that the city has to try to incentivize housing. And often this is a controversial document in the sense that those who live in Brentwood say, I moved here because of the way it currently looks and maybe not interested in more housing, or if I am, I want it to look a certain way. And sometimes that's frustrating for some. The state has their bureaucratic lever and will say, no, you need to accommodate these kinds of housing. And one of the biggest misconceptions is the city has to plan for it, meaning it could go in the following areas in the following quantities for the following income levels. But cities don't build housing. I don't have a hammer. They won't trust me with a hard hat. We trust the development community and the market to then come in and make that happen. And so the state just makes sure that the city isn't putting up unnecessary or unreasonable barriers to precluding development from occurring, especially at those lower income levels. And that sometimes is manifest in higher density apartments and other housing stock.
So to my understanding, the state bases their numbers on census data that they receive every however often, 10 years, or I'm sure that they do smaller ones statewide, right, every so often. Why is it the state that is saying these are the numbers, and why hasn't it, why has that been taken out of control of the local municipalities?
Sure, great question. Census plays a role, and then a large regional planning agency, in our case, ABAG, that's an acronym for something. They sit down
I know
and
this
say,
one. It's Association of Bay Area
of Government or something.
Yes. I've done a little research on this.
So there's a large regional planning agency, ABAG, that calculates what kind of housing needs are needed and then allocates those throughout the various cities in their region.
Okay.
And so however that's computed, they've assigned 1,500 plus units to Brentwood. And this is a challenge for most cities who have maybe already built out, and they have to figure out how to fit their several hundred to several thousand number of units being assigned and may have to rezone existing properties or build up higher density just to accommodate those numbers. Brentwood's in a unique situation, perhaps, in that we have available land that we can assign those units at the level of incomes that are being needed. And so at this point, we're currently just out with a draft that just got released this past week and soliciting public comment for the next 30 days to see if we have assigned these allocations correctly in the minds of the residents. And then that will be considered on September 27th by the City Council.
I believe that's the deadline for comments on the public draft,
For
correct?
the 30-day public review period, correct.
And you can find that on the city's website under Housing Element. I know it has its own separate website.
Yes.
I believe it's BrentwoodHousingElement.com.
I believe you're right.
Yeah. So definitely, if you have comment, participate.
Yep. And there's a comment form that says for each of the 8 different chapters of the Housing Element, 8 or so, what comments do you have? What changes do you recommend? And that will all be considered by the City Council. And while we received a lot of comments before this draft was prepared, some 500 plus, 80 or 90% said, we're good. No more housing, please. We still have to try to meet the state mandates. And we do have needs in this community that aren't being met because of the high housing prices. And the state, I think, is associating homelessness as well with the high cost of housing. And this is part of the solution to try to address some of those issues.
For sure. And it's all well and good, I feel like, for residents to say, well, we don't want any more houses. And I know that the City Council takes that into account. They're pretty passionate about that. However, what are the consequences if we don't meet the numbers that are required by the state?
Well, the first step is we have to have a certified housing element by the state, Department of Housing and Community Development. So they want to make sure that we haven't inserted barriers that make it harder to develop these housing units at the income levels required. And we also have to make sure that we are accommodating all of the undeveloped parcels that could be used for housing, that's being considered. So if we don't have a compliant housing element, one of the consequences the state could sue us. That could have significant financial consequences. The other issue is that they could take away the rights of city councils to have discretion over certain housing projects, meaning devoted yes or no, right? And if they just say any housing can just go into Brentwood without even asking the city council or the residents, that could be one of those consequences. So definitely could lose more control than if we comply and do our best to plan for it and let the market forces dictate what they can. And where we can accommodate it with some financial incentivizing, we try to do that.
Perfect. Continuing on the want, not want,
Sure,
consequences, stuff like that. I do know through my research, I'm a little bit nerdy. I've kind of latched onto this topic because it affects a lot of people. That's, both people who already live here and own and people who live here and rent and maybe can't afford
right.
to purchase their own house yet. It's across the board.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that for cycle 5, we did fall a little bit short.
Yes.
Or really a lot short of planning for housing for very low income, and moderate income families. Any insight on why that might be?
I'm trying to remember the number off the top of my head, but I believe we saw the production of about 15% in that very low and low income category. But again, cities don't build houses or apartments. So as long as the city isn't putting up unnecessary barriers, it's up to the market to make those deals with property owners, pitch their plans, and develop the units. So I don't know how much control the city really has over it in the end. And as far as I understand, most cities have not met their RHNA requirements from the 5th cycle.
For sure.
And it's just very challenging to get housing inventory built in California with all the environmental laws, all of the neighborhoods issues. It's a challenge.
Okay. How do you think that we can ensure that the city will better meet the goals of the 6th RHNA cycle coming up?
Well, we struggled with building or having production of the 700 units. Now that we have to do 1,500, It's a steep climb in my mind, but I know the city council is committed to being compliant with the state requirements. And much of that opportunity is going to lie in the Innovation Center at Brentwood site.
Which we will talk about a
Okay,
little bit later. Yes, for
perfect.
sure.
So much of the housing will probably occur there. I don't know, off the top of my head, probably 75% of the housing requirements.
And that's going to be more higher density.
Higher density,
yes,
correct.
Perfect. And then we will talk about the Innovation Center
Sure.
a little later in the show. But to my understanding, that is zoned for a little bit higher density. Is that correct?
Correct.
Do we have any other areas that are already zoned, high and very high density, kind of more into the city proper, or is that kind of like one of the last areas out in?
There are a few other areas currently zoned for it.
Okay.
And then through the housing element, we've identified a few other sites. The next largest one is just south of the John Muir Hospital.
Okay.
That open area there is zoned for high density residential. So that will be an opportunity site that will help encourage and market so we can try to be compliant with these state requirements.
Perfect. And it's right near the highway as
Yes.
well. So that is nice for people who have to commute.
Keep that traffic farther away from coming in.
Right.
close to
The smaller surface
Yep.
streets. I know that's one of the big arguments that always comes up.
Yep.
And I can appreciate it. Moving back to the general plan, when people buy in Brentwood, they probably don't always take a look at that general plan
No.
and take that into account.
No.
You know, they buy because they see Brentwood as being an idyllic farm community, a quiet little town, which it is. It's beautiful. You know, you
Great
compare
schools, great downtown.
Correct. You know, and the closer into San Francisco you get, the more kind of metropolitan and fuller
Sure.
cities get. So Brentwood definitely still has that appeal, but I think people forget that they're not the only ones that are moving to Brentwood
Yes.
because it has that appeal. And so
Correct.
that whole supply and demand issue arises. So pretty much what it boils down to, whether people are happy about it or not, is that our city's general plan, Brentwood's general plan, already allows for the possibility of meeting our sixth cycle requirements, even though they've doubled.
Yes, that is true. So we don't anticipate having to rezone other parcels throughout the city to accommodate that unit count that we have to see production of. We should have all that capacity needed now. And I mentioned multifamily, but another way to get those unit counts done is through accessory dwelling units. These are the grandma unit in the backyard, right? And some new state legislation has come about since the last housing element that has made it easier to build those kind of units, as well as most housing issues. And so that will also help meet those goals.
I have a question about that. And I know this has also been a hot button topic, SB9, right? Is that falls under State Bill 9 that was recently passed. What is the city going to do to stop people from building these units on their property and then using them as Airbnb units or something similar, you know, home away or vacation rentals or short, you know, any of that encompassing short-term rental instead of, say, an affordable housing unit or something of that ilk?
Sure. Well, since the passage of Senate Bill 9, the City Council preemptively took some steps with an urgency ordinance to make sure there were some parameters in place to ensure that compliance with that law was meeting certain parameters that they outlined. And that's a longer conversation.
That'll be next time you come back.
Sure. But it's to make sure that it fits within the community, that it matches the style of the home that it's in, that it's being encouraged as well where it's feasible. Now, there are a larger thought, too, that says cities were planned, assuming a certain number of people living in a certain subdivision, utilities for a certain number of people living there. And when you start adding additional units everywhere, including schools, they're basing their forecasts on where are the population growth based on certain subdivisions coming into the city, so they know when they need to add a new school. And with these accessory dwelling units or ADUs popping up citywide, how do they properly forecast where a school should go? And that's just one of the new challenges that we're having to address.
And also, I believe with SB8, which is a whole, you know, we won't get into the weeds too much on this one, but that's the one that says, well, if I own this parcel, technically I can subdivide it without going through a bunch of the red tape that you would have had to go through previously,
It
which
has
can also
reduced a lot of red tape. Yep.
yeah, which can also kind of mess with the roads,
Sure.
schools, all of the infrastructure. It's a lot. It's a lot to think about, and I know that there are people who are definitely not happy, but by the same token, we are also having a large affordable housing crisis.
Sure.
Not
no
housing.
question.
We have plenty of houses. It's the affordable housing, the housing for the people who live and work already in our community, who are either unhoused or inadequately housed, or are one paycheck away from being evicted because they can't pay their rent.
Sure.
And so those people who are already contributing members, they deserve places to live too. And I know it's been a difficult argument. I know that. I really appreciate what the city does in being attentive
Sure.
to those issues. With that being said, we're going to go ahead and hear another quick word from this episode's sponsor. But stick around because we have a lot of great topics coming up.
Today's episode of Clocked In with the Press is brought to you by our friends at Sip and Scoop in downtown Brentwood. Sip and Scoop started out as a food truck, serving coffee, hot cocoa, and desserts on the go, but the demand was so high that they had to open a shop at 234 Oak Street. Here at Clocked In, we love Sip and Scoop. They're just a few doors down from our offices, and we're there often enough that they know our names and orders. It's like Cheers, but better, because there's dessert. Try their cold brew coffee, or choose a latte or Americano for a classic coffee drink that can't be beat. And we haven't even talked about their breakfast sandwiches and avocado toast. Have I mentioned the root beer floats and the iced lemonades? Those are my personal favorites. Okay, obviously I could talk about food all day, but here's the point. You gotta go to Sip and Scoop. Visit them at 234 Oak Street in downtown Brentwood, or have Sip and Scoop brought to you wherever you are by DoorDash. Having an event? Let Sip and Scoop cater it. Give them a call at 925-684-7710 to find out more.
Welcome back, and thank you so much to our sponsor. So the other big news that just kind of came down is Chief Hansen is retiring.
Yes.
Crazy.
Bummer.
It is. He's going to be desperately missed.
Absolutely.
He's definitely run a great department. But that's one more thing for you. You're in charge of finding his replacement, correct?
Correct.
How is that search going? Can you share any of the details?
So we have 2 very capable captains and 4 great lieutenants. And in consultation with the chief, decided to do an internal recruitment only and anticipate the captains applying. And we'll run them through a series of interviews with the executive team in about 2 weeks, and then I will meet with them individually 2 days later and make a decision. But either captain will be an admirable chief and do a great job. But Tom Hansen definitely has big shoes and will be sorely missed.
For sure. So that is one of the questions I was going to ask, if it was just internal hiring from within, which is great because they already know how the departments run.
Got a great culture there. They know what to do. They're well aligned.
Yes. Fantastic. And like you said, I don't think that we could go wrong with any of the
Sure.
captains or lieutenants if they're also
They're
in consideration.
eligible to apply.
Yay.
So we'll see what happens. It closes, I think, Friday. So
Yeah, and then I know that the swearing in and the retirement and swearing in ceremony is already planned.
September 28th, 4:30, the community center. We'll do Chief Hansen's farewell and then recognize the new chief and then introduce him or
Wonderful.
him to the community. There's only hims applying.
Yeah.
And
For
so
now.
we're excited to put that together for them.
Wonderful. We will definitely be there for that. I believe in the Army they call it a hail and farewell, is what
And
my
I think
husband.
there's something final log off or something.
Yeah, I don't know,
for police.
something fancy. It's crazy. And I did the fire department one, and now with Chief Hansen retiring, but we will be there. We have a little story in this week's paper about it. Definitely pick up a copy. During your last episode with us, we talked a little bit about the Marsh Creek Amphitheater project.
Yes.
What do we have as an update on that?
Sure. That is one of our ongoing strategic plan initiatives, very exciting capital project that we're eager to see happen. It started some initial designs years ago and some initial environmental review, and then for whatever reason was not moving forward. Since I've been here, there's been a restart to that effort to ensure that we have stakeholder input. So surveys were done with the communities, especially those that were going to be impacted, traffic, noise, etc. And they were very involved and participated in that stakeholder outreach effort. And now we're working towards finishing up 30% design, so a third of the way there. And then state law requires us to do an environmental update because our last one was so many years ago and the state laws have changed. So
Sure.
a supplemental environmental impact report will be out early next year. And then that has to be out for several months, which means by the end of 23, we will probably finish up the design based on the environmental impact report analysis and mitigation, and be out to bid in 2024, which just seems like forever away.
It really does.
It's really that far away, and probably complete end of 2024 or 2025. So,
well, that's exciting. I mean, it's still exciting to have it on the horizon.
Very exciting, but don't start planning to get your seats there yet. Putting your picnic tables down.
Will it be the new venue for concerts in the park, or will it operate a little bit differently, like maybe how we see, maybe not to the same scale as Concord Pavilion, but will it be paid events that will happen? Will kind of incentivize bigger bands to come in? No, and no shade thrown at the bands that play at Concert in the Park, because they're all great.
They're great.
But, kind of more widely known
next
bands.
Level.
Yeah, stuff like that, and then people will pay.
It's being designed at about 750 seats. So that alone is going to limit. It's no Concord Pavilion.
Sure.
But it will be more of a community-based concerts in the park. Some of those decisions just haven't even been considered yet, with consultation with the Parks and Recreation Commission, the City Council. But for sure, concerts in the park will continue somewhere. And we anticipate a whole lot more entertainment opportunities for the community out at the amphitheater.
I'm excited. Maybe that's my cue. I need to start building like a summer outdoor Shakespeare program, or Shakespeare in the park.
You've got time.
I know, right? It's so crazy when we think about these big projects.
Serious.
and then really when we get right down to it and hear like, okay, well, this is 3 years out or 4 years out, and I'm so impatient. I love live music performances. I'm like, I just want it to happen.
Serious. I know staff is eager for it. Community's eager for it. We'll talk about the Innovation Center later, but even that specific plan was approved in 2018, and just now kind of moving forward with the infrastructure, because it takes forever to find the financing and work with the property owners to see that come to fruition with all those job opportunities that could happen there.
Sure. And I know I've seen some preliminary designs for the amphitheater, and it looks like it's going to be beautiful. Again, you can find those on the city's website.
Yes.
The redesigned website, which is wonderful. If you haven't hopped on there, I'm going to go ahead and plug that again. It looks great.
Good.
It's a lot more, to me, it's a lot more intuitive, user-friendly. I can find what I'm looking for easier. And if I can't find it almost immediately, there's a great little search bar that
The search bar has been majorly enhanced to really work well.
Fantastic.
So use it.
Yes.
Good.
Definitely check it out.
Thank you.
But I'm glad that you brought up Innovation Center, because that leads me to my next question. What's the update there?
The City Council will be updating the specific plan that was done in 2018 with the latest vision and market analysis at their September 13th meeting, and they've discussed it a few times already this summer, working towards adoption of it. And then that'll come to the Planning Commission September, and then back to the City Council for final approval in October. And then we'll be ready to implement, and our staff are eager to pitch it to developers and to business prospects and start moving things forward. We're still finishing up the design on the Sand Creek Road extension. That will be a major thoroughfare to access the park. And then all the wet utilities, water, sewer, storm drain, et cetera, getting all that entitled and easements for it, and get that ready for construction early next year as well.
Fantastic. So that's actually a little bit ahead of the amphitheater project, it sounds like.
It will be.
I'm excited. Tell me, and our listeners, what you're anticipating the Innovation Center to bring. I know you've mentioned housing, we've mentioned commercial. I know that one of the big news plugs was Costco is coming to that area as part of that. To my understanding, I believe that we're trying to draw BART out to that general area as well. So it's just kind of this little hub. Give me some more details.
It's got a little bit of everything. Housing you mentioned, Transit Village adjacent to where regional transportation could be, and maybe it's BART. We've had conversations with them, and they wanted to make sure that they weren't left out with enough space. They still said it could be 20 to 30 years because of the huge financial price tag on bringing BART out here. But we'll plan for it, and we'll see how things go. But regional commercial, you mentioned Costco does have plans in with the city now, and it's under plan review to locate within the Innovation Center site. And several other prospects that we're talking with as well that are waiting on this approval, and hopefully we'll move forward.
Fantastic. I'm excited.
And the best part, too, is when they move forward, they will help bring the infrastructure instead of the city paying for it. So because they can't open up until they put in infrastructure, and that helps save the taxpayers' monies as well. So
wonderful.
Yeah.
I know people love to hear it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I know that there was a survey that was put out by the city kind of geared toward what companies, businesses, et cetera, might be coming into, what would be helpful to city residents to bring into the Innovation Center and possibly have satellite offices, et cetera. Was the survey helpful?
It was very enlightening. Cut the Commute was the name of the survey. I don't remember offhand, but there were several hundred responses, and our economic development team followed up with each and every one of them to get more information. But we learned that a lot of, and no surprise, people work in the Bay Area and live here. A lot from the tech side, and we'd love to bring those tech offices to Brentwood, so cut their commute. We also learned a little bit more through our utility billing process when new residents sign up. We've actually followed up with some of them to find out, thanks for moving to Brentwood, where do you work, and learn some more about their commute patterns. The more we have that information, we can then share that with their companies or other prospects and say, hey, you've got a workforce that already lives here and would be glad to work for you if you come and locate in Brentwood. So it's a very useful tool.
And I'm sure there's some incentivization there as well to maybe get some of these companies, we'll scratch your back if you scratch ours sort of thing.
Correct.
And
we have financial dollars that we're ready to commit to someone who's going to bring a lot of jobs, a lot of sales tax, a lot of property tax through building a nice office complex. So we've been sharing our incentive program and hoping to land some big ones soon.
Fingers crossed for sure. And the reason, other than cutting the commute, which is a nice perk, keeping taxpayer dollars in our city. I know my husband, he, pre-COVID, he would commute to San Francisco. And so it was breakfast in the city because he'd have to leave at 5 a.m., breakfast in the city, lunch in the city. Maybe he needed to pick something up from a hardware store, but by the time, I mean, he would BART, so there's not that driving, but still, even then, leaving the BART station, I need to fill my tank, so he fills in Pittsburgh or Antioch, and that's dollars that Brentwood loses out on.
No question. There's an economic impact and there's a quality of life impact. Sitting in traffic for hours a day is not 100%. Fun, especially when you come back home, and we want you to enjoy your family and relaxation time. So.
Yeah. I think, on any given day when he was making that commute, it would be between 3 and 4 hours.
Wow.
Now companies are starting to want to fill these empty office spaces. Well, bring them here. Fill them in the city where people live.
Your workforce is here.
Right.
Bring them here.
Right, for sure. So getting onto the commercial a little bit, Aspen and Monte Rosa are our two newest parks that just opened. They are available to everybody, is that correct?
They are unique neighborhood parks in that they don't accommodate parking because the goal was to have it be for people who live in that area.
Okay.
But certainly all of Brentwood's welcome to find their way there and use those parks.
What is special other than them being walk-to parks?
Special that they've been in the works for 20 years and they're finally built and ready to go. And our community, especially the residents that live there, have been very patient, and we're appreciative of the developer finally finishing those up.
That is nice. I feel like maybe sometimes feet get dragged a little bit on that aspect because ultimately it doesn't really make the developer any money.
They were in cement blocks, but dragged. Yes. And with those two new parks now coming into place, we have almost 100 parks in the whole city. And I know we've got at least 3 or 4 in current different stages of development. So we're past the 100 mark threshold, which is a very exciting
It is.
milestone for a city and lots of opportunities for the residents to enjoy.
It's definitely one of my favorite things about living in Brentwood
Yeah.
is we have so much park space. My kids love it. I love it. You know, I'm big into hiking, and while we don't really have any maybe true hiking trails in city parks, we're right, you know, Round Valley's right there, just a hop over Vasco. You know, all the East Bay regional parks are great too, but Creek Trail, which runs the length of our city,
Right.
is a wonderful trail. And I know people walk. I wouldn't really call it hiking. I've ridden my bike though from end to end all the way out to Big Break, and it is
It's a good ride.
beautiful, and it's not difficult.
Sure.
You know, you can take your kids out there. You can walk it if you're older. It's a nice easy. There's not really any elevation change that's going to get you. It's just a nice morning walk. A lot of wildlife too.
It's well used.
Yeah.
Well used.
What other this will circle back to what you're saying about the ones in development. What other parks might be on the horizon for the city?
We have several other subdivisions in the planning stages now that are all required to put in a city park. So we'll see how those all materialize over the next 6 months or so. And again, continue to add to our total inventory over 100.
Wonderful. And then what about upgrades to any of the 100+ parks that we already have?
We have ongoing efforts to upgrade playground material. They have a certain life cycle, make sure they're safe for the kids to use. We are adding restrooms at Guerin Park and Creekside Park, and those awards for those contracts were recently granted by the City Council and should be in place, I think, by the end of the year, first of the year. So those will be nice additional amenities there. We are working on releasing the request for qualifications to bring in an architect designing landscaping firm to help us work with stakeholders and design the Sand Creek Sports Complex, which will be a large park.
And that's indoor-outdoor, correct?
These would be outdoor fields.
Oh, okay. There is no indoor element to that?
No.
Oh, my bad.
No, those cost a whole lot more.
Yeah, right.
We dedicated about $15 million towards just those outdoor fields, so expensive enough. So we're hoping that the funding allows for some artificial turf as well as natural turf in the flood district property that's adjacent to the city-owned property.
Wonderful. And maybe that's what I was confused with, the artificial plus natural.
I think you're right. There was initially some initial plans to put a indoor structure there that had basketball, indoor recreation, but that hasn't been prioritized at this point.
Things change so quick sometimes that it's hard to keep up.
These buildings just cost more and more money every year, and so it takes longer to find the funding for it.
So let me ask this. What will make the Sand Creek Sports Complex different than the athletic fields on Sunset, or will they kind of be the same idea? We just need that much more space because we're a growing city.
Multiple benefits. We have more demand for them. The fields at Sunset are natural, so they are wet and soggy for... When we used to have this thing that would, like, water would fall from the sky. I think they called it rain, and it would create flooding out there. With these artificial fields, that will be playable all year long.
Nice.
So big benefit. They get hot during the summer, so there's a little bit downside, but for the rest of the year, get much more play out of the fields.
That's exciting, and I know we talk about it every week on our news and sports podcast. We have some fantastic athletes out here, so just, you know, really serving them in having this additional space to go to is going to be huge. And then I also heard that Creekside, as we know, it's got a disc golf course now. Yes. Creekside Park here.
Have you tried it?
I'm not a disc golfer, but I've seen people in action. I know, just throw a frisbee.
Just throw a frisbee. I've not yet tried it either. I need to get out there.
But I know it's a huge draw.
Yes, it is.
And I know this because I used to do photo sessions at Creekside, and I do so less now because there's a lot of
ducking and dodging.
Yeah, I don't want anyone to get hit in the head with a frisbee.
No.
However, I've heard that are going to be pickleball courts going in.
Correct. That is also one of the council's strategic plan initiatives at Creekside Park, over where the basketball courts are, adjacent to the tennis courts. Wonderful. And those are being designed now, I believe. So should be open next spring.
I think I saw some plans, some different adjustments. So, and that won't take away from what's already there. We're just adding to the basketball courts and the tennis courts.
I'm believe it may lose one of the basketball hoops,
Okay.
but
But you
there's
can
a
still play
bigger
half court.
demand for pickleball right now. It's all the rage, and we have other basketball courts citywide.
Hysterical. I used to play pickleball in high school.
Really?
A little bit. I mean, not anything crazy. We just use the outside of the auditorium wall
Sure.
for it. Yeah. So it'll be nice to
Yeah.
have a little court that people can go to.
There's a group that puts up temporary pickleball courts at Creekside now, so this will make it more permanent and painted lines and all those things to make it
Wonderful.
enjoyable game.
Wonderful. That'll be nice.
Yeah.
Do we have a public track anywhere in Brentwood? Like for track and field?
Those trails. I'm not aware of one. No.
That could be something.
You're a runner?
No. Only if I'm being chased. I told you I hike.
That gets me running.
Yeah, right. If you see me running, you should probably consider
running.
keeping up. Yeah.
Outrun you, right?
Yeah. Are there any other new developments in the works that you're excited about and want to let our listeners know about?
One of the big tasks the City Council took on this year was putting together a potential ballot measure that they have authorized to move forward. It now has a name and letter, Measure Q. So there's information on our website, and we can certainly come back and give you more information as we get closer to the election. But in the gist of it is it'd be to protect the park space now and any open space areas that are zoned through our general plan, and the privately owned golf courses as well, to keep them open space and not turned into something else. So that'll be on the ballot in November 2022.
Correct. I actually wrote a story about it.
Yes, you did.
As much as I am invested in affordable housing, I am also heavily invested in open space as well.
It's a balance.
I do have a question about that, though.
Yes.
With the privately owned golf courses, I know that there had been talk about potentially building housing, senior housing, I think was how it was presented, and that didn't pan out because there was a big uproar about it. But right now, those golf courses are closed, except for Brentwood Golf Course, right? That's the one that's
Shadow
open.
Lakes has opened up
have they?
9 holes.
Okay. Are there plans then to also try and reopen Deer Ridge as a golf course, or are they going to kind of let it fallow and maybe be some hiking trails or parkland?
That's a whole podcast in and of itself.
I know, right?
The short version is the current owners have inherited, been given to a nonprofit, a golf course that has no active irrigation system that works and would cost 7 figures to replace and don't have a funding mechanism to pull it off. So they may at some point turn in an application to try to get something done out there.
It would be really nice to see that kind of as a more natural wildlife and hiking area. But again, one of the questions that kind of popped into my head as I was writing the article on the Open Space Initiative, or Measure Q now as it has been named, it struck me a little bit as not a land grab because the land's already there and you're not taking anything from it, but with the growing population of Brentwood and the general plan already covering those numbers, but eventually if we have to build out more, and as you said, there isn't the money to irrigate as needed if you want it to return to a golf course, why would you want to keep that land from being able to be developed? Or is that something that can be reassessed even assuming that that Measure Q passes?
That is probably a question for the Deer Ridge residents and the City Council. If that was pitched to rezone that for housing, it would need to occur before November 2022. If Measure Q passes, the only way through that mechanism to make a change from the open space golf course to residential would be to put it on the ballot and have the residents citywide vote for it to see if that should be rezoned to housing.
Perfect.
And unless the state supersedes that, that's the anticipated outcome of this Measure Q.
Perfect. And again, I'm all for open space. It was just something that was kicking around in
Sure.
my head. Sounds a lot like democracy in action, and I love to see it. So.
Empowering voters to participate in the process.
Good.
Absolutely.
Yes, as they should.
Yes.
But again, that's a whole other podcast. Any commercial stuff coming in that we're excited about? New stores, new restaurants?
Off Brentwood Boulevard, Sand Creek, we are seeing applications for Denny's, Starbucks, Wendy's, Chipotle, somebody else.
Dunkin' Donuts.
We have talked to Dunkin' Donuts, actually. And then streets, I think they've got a few new tenants coming in. Marshall's is planning to open up in the whatever center that is, the Home Depot area. I believe next week or two.
Oh,
We'll have their grand opening.
wonderful.
And then working with a Fortune 500 major life sciences company and trying to attract them to the Innovation Center site. So fingers crossed. They're looking at multiple sites nationwide, and we're in the running still. So
Wonderful.
see how that goes. But our economic development team does not lay low. They are on the phone calling prospects all day long, and the most robust efforts I think I've ever seen at a city. So they are pounding the pavement trying to find job creating opportunities and interesting retail and commercial that our residents would enjoy.
Excellent. I love a good late night meal at Denny's from time to time, and stuff like that, and no beef there, but I would love to see some local restaurants
Absolutely.
too, some smaller non-chain restaurants come in. That would be huge. And Brentwood, I mean, it's no secret. We love our small businesses. The city is fantastic at supporting the small businesses, between Downtown Brentwood Coalition and Chamber of Commerce and all of that out there. So it's really great to see everything that the city manager's office, the economic development team do to bring in those businesses as well. Well, we've talked about a lot.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you might want our listeners to know?
We have city council elections this fall for the two new districts, District 2 and 4, and we encourage the residents to pay attention, get to know the candidates, and get me two new bosses. So we'll see how that goes.
Are you sure you're hoping for that? No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
I will get two new bosses either way. So looking forward to it.
Whether you like it or not. No, it should be an interesting election. I know that we have some really great candidates for both districts.
Absolutely.
It's actually my district, Garin Ranch area, is District 4.
Okay.
So I will be able to vote. But even if you're not in a district that has a council member up for election this cycle, this midterm, familiarize yourself. We've already talked about one of the other local initiatives that will be on our ballot with Measure Q. But there's definitely statewide, don't be afraid, familiarize yourself with what's going to be on the ballot and then get out there and participate. Thank you again so much for being here. It's
Likewise.
A pleasure as always.
Thank you much.
Absolutely. That is it for today's episode of Clocked In with the Press. Many thanks to Tim for taking the time to sit down with us again. And many thanks to you, our listeners. We appreciate your continued support. If you would like to read more news stories of East Contra Costa County, you can do so through our website at www.thepress.net or through our Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at thepress_net. If you have any thoughts on this episode or any other before it, you can email them to podcasts@brentwoodpress.com. That is all I have for you today, but I look forward to next time. This is Melissa.
And Tim.
Clocking out.
Thanks again to this week's sponsor, Sip and Scoop. Remember that feeling of hearing the ice cream truck coming down the street as a kid? Bring back that feeling by visiting Sip and Scoop. They started out as a truck too, and now they have a brick and mortar shop right here in Brentwood, so you don't have to chase them down the block. Sip and Scoop has all kinds of high-quality desserts to satisfy any sweet tooth. Gelato, root beer floats, and iced coffees are just a few of my favorites. And the whole menu is available to go on DoorDash. Stop by their shop in downtown Brentwood and get your scoop on.